I don't cut my hair when I'm on a job, when I don't shave. My name's Tom Coker. I draw comic books. Right now I draw The Black Monday Murders. It's a book written by Jonathan Hickman, being published by Image Comics. I've done a bunch of other Image comic stuff like Undying Love and Gen 13 and The Max and various things. And Daredevil Noir from Marvel and Wolverine and lots of stuff. Lots and lots of stuff. So,
Yeah.
Google or Wikipedia.
So I wanted to be in this shot because when I got out of college, I got a crappy job, and there was a comic store right next door, and I would poke in there, and I was hearing about this guy, Tom Coker, who was just starting to get into the industry, and a lot of people in that comic shop, it seemed like things are starting to happen with that.
Yeah, it was amazing.
It was really exciting for me. I read comics as a kid, and when I got into college, at the time in college, this was 90s, early 90s, no one was interested in comics, and certainly not as an art form, in college, and so I kind of got out of it, but then I had nothing to do, and I was at this comic shop now, and it was really exciting to me. I heard this rumor, and I don't know if it's true, that you had done that issue of Wolverine where Magneto's
yanks his skeleton out or whatever it is.
Magneto yanked Wolverine's exoskeleton out of his body, and I had heard that as a result you got royalties enough to buy a house or put a down payment on a house or
not exactly. I had done a book for Eric Larson at Image called Vanguard during the Boom era, and I remember I was being asked to draw like Art Adams and Rob Liefeld and these guys that I think are great, but I can't draw like those guys. And so I was going to quit the book Vanguard, and I called Eric, and he said, well, that's good because we're going to have to cancel the book anyway because it only sold 350,000 copies, which at that time was the lowest selling Image book ever. And I felt so bad, I cried, and I told my dad, like, I only sold 350,000 copies, like, what am I going to do? But the royalty check from that book allowed me to take like a year off and just go back to figure drawing and learn how to draw and learn how to do what I do and how I draw. And then the first book I did after I came back was the Wolverine, and that book allowed me to just basically not have to scramble for work for like 3 years. I could be really picky about what I did for 3 years and keep going to figure drawing and keep doing classes and keep learning how to get better at and perfect what I do. And so for a long time.
Yeah. So I bring this story up because when I heard, comics were out of my mind, but when I heard the story about this Tom Coker person, it got me starting to think about, I have ideas for comics. And so I realized when I saw you were here at this show, I realized you were kind of responsible for me getting into comics and starting to do this. Isn't that crazy?
That's terrifying.
Yeah. So,
I'm sorry. I apologize to you and your family.
So, yeah. Anyways, how did you get your start in comics?
My start's really kind of messy and simple at the same time. Where when I was 5 or 6 years old, a friend of my father's gave my dad a box of Creepy magazine, the old, like from the 60s, 70s, and 80s, or 60s and 70s at that point. And there were these big black and white magazines that are horror stories, and it's like an anthology, so they're all like 5, 6, 7, 8 pages long. And he gave him those books because he knew I liked comic books, and those books were wholly inappropriate for a kid my age at that time, but my dad just gave them to me, and they were I still think they're the best books ever, the best anthology for sure, but they're the best, for my money, the best comics ever published. And I read those books until they just disintegrated in my hands. And it's the only thing I ever wanted to do was draw comics. From about 5 years old, I would just say, I'm going to draw comic books, and I would just draw constantly, I mean, it was almost a problem at a certain point how much I drew. And but when I turned 15, my girlfriend at the time got pregnant, and I thought to myself, well, the only two things I'm any good at are drawing pictures and washing dishes. And so if I'm going to have a career and my girlfriend wants to keep this baby, then I have to get a job. And so I got out of high school, took my test, got out of high school, and spent the next 2 years at that comic shop, the Comic Box, at Paul Martin and C.P. Smith and Mel Ruby and who else? I mean,
your letterer.
Sandra Hope. The letterer. Shit. I mean, it's amazing how many people came. Sandra Hope came out of there. I mean, it's amazing how many really, really, really talented people came out of that little comic book shop in a strip mall. And I spent 2 years working there without. I would go there. I actually worked there, but we would just go there and draw all day and night long. And I'd draw for like 8 or 10 hours a day for a couple of years. And then we started coming to this when I was 16, the San Diego Comic Con. So that's 30 years ago. I've been coming to this thing, and it took me about a year and a half. When I was 16, I got some stuff published in Marvel Age. They do like a up-and-coming new talent kind of thing in the back, where they had John Romita Sr. give me a criticism, and it was fantastic. And then I would come to these shows and go to every artist in Artist Alley, or every editor, every person that knew anything about comics, and you'd show them your portfolio, and they'd all give you a critique, and then you would go to the next guy and do the same thing. And eventually, after a couple of years, I started getting work. I was 17, I think. I just turned 17, and I've never done anything else since. I'm 40. I mean, I've done other things, but my main job for the last 30 years has been drawing comics sporadically.
So did you have day jobs during that time until you were able to start finding work?
I worked in a pizza joint. I worked as a dishwasher. I worked as a line cook. I mean, those kind of things. Later, I mean, after I did comics and there were times when like the comic industry would kind of shrivel up or dry up, and I would go do like animation, or I would go do like design and conceptual design, or a lot of TV and film and animation, like cartoon design and stuff like that, and then I directed a couple of movies and stuff like that. But for the most part, it's just been the main thrust of my entire life's work has just been doing comics.
I remember when we talked about it a few years ago. It felt like your comic output. It didn't feel real big. It felt
dried
like,
up.
It felt like you were finding work in other places, and that other work was almost the day job work. But you enjoyed the comics so much.
The thing that happened was that I mean, comics are a real commitment, and so it took, because a lot of the other jobs pay really, really well. So you get a job designing a cartoon for 6 weeks, and you make as much as you make spending 6 months drawing a comic book, and so those jobs are really alluring. But at a certain point, I just had to like really, really commit to doing the comic stuff, and to the exclusion of everything else. And then I was lucky enough to have Jonathan Hickman, who we'd met and kind of knew in passing, asked me to do a book, and then that was essentially that.
Did it feel like that was like a directory change, landing that gig?
No, at the time, no. I mean, the doing the book has felt, I've learned an enormous amount doing the book, and it's been it's allowed me to like really hone what I do and really focus and really do my best to like perfect the craft or whatever, and figure out what I do exactly. But it wasn't until the book started coming out, which was like I think a year after I started on it, that the book actually, I realized what it's just a really good book. I'm really lucky to be on a really, really good book, and we all really like working on it, and I think that translates to the fans, Jonathan has a great fan base, and my fan base, and everybody else, and it feels more like when I was drawing in the comic book shop as a kid, and I would just draw for fun and draw what I liked, and everybody thought it was great, and we all had a good time. It feels a lot more like that than drawing some comic that I don't understand and is confusing, and the writing is all over the place, and no one cares, and the book reflects that. You know, it's a painful, awful, stupid experience.